Charlene, welcome to the podcast. Good to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to talk with you about this. As we were talking just before, I just had Andrew on talking about AI. AI is such a hot topic nowadays, so having someone like yourself to kind of share where we're at, maybe put the puzzle pieces together, because I think a lot of folks are probably confused, like I am, of like, where are we? Where are we going? I want to get down that rabbit hole, but I was actually really curious to go all the way back in history here because it seems like and correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it seems like you've kind of had the pulse on like where things are going from a digital transformation standpoint, kind of thinking differently. I know you talk a lot about disruption. Um, I was thinking about this because back it looked like in the early 90s, you were kind of it looked like early stage of like internet publishing. And I was thinking about like I used to have a paper out back in the early 90s. And I never could have imagined, nor I think most people, that all of a sudden papers are going to go digital, later on. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that seemed like very innovative at the time, actually putting papers online. I thought that'd be a cool story maybe to share to start off.
Yeah, I've been digital for a very long time. I mean, I had an Apple II, I think, when I was 10.
Oh, wow.
So early on, thanks to my father who loved gadgets. And so I grew up writing on computers. And so I could see, I just love what technology can do for us. And so I graduated from Harvard Business School in May of 1993, which is the same month that the World Wide Web was invented by Tim Berners-Lee.
Yeah.
And I graduated thinking, okay, all the stuff that was happening with AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, newspapers are starting to be on there. And I could see that this was going to revolutionize and disrupt the business model for newspapers.
Mm.
And so I went to the San Jose Mercury News, which is the top newspaper in Silicon Valley, to figure out what was the future going to be. And, so it landed there in 1993. Was there for about 2 years, helping put the newspaper online, selling ads on the internet, training the sales force on how to sell internet ads
Mm.
and how to talk to customers about that and advertisers around that. And then went east and worked with a group of community newspapers to also put those online. And so I started early in my career by running towards disruption
Mm.
and making sense of it and operating in it for a long time, and then became eventually an analyst when I started having kids. And I didn't want to be so much in an operating mode. And I thought I'd do it for just 2 years. And here I am, still doing it 25 years later, as an analyst, author, and just talking about the latest technologies, making sense of them
Mm.
so that we can actually make good use of them.
Where did that you mentioned about having the Apple II when you were 10? Like, was it your upbringing, or like what made you become a disruptor? Have you always been like when you were like 6, do you have stories of being a disruptor?
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of tidbit. I grew up in Detroit, in the Detroit area. I was born in Detroit, grew up a little bit in Detroit, and then moved to the suburbs. And there were very few Asian Americans. My Both of my parents are immigrants from Hong Kong and Taiwan.
Wow.
And so growing up Asian in downriver Detroit, where there were no people of color, zero. And so I got used to being a disruption, just personally, just always being different
Yeah.
and learning to navigate that. So I got comfortable being uncomfortable from a very, very young age.
Mm.
And I think that I modeled the optimism that my parents said is that you can make this work. It may be really difficult, but you'll figure it out. And so I've taken a lot of that upbringing, incorporated into the way that I just see the world. And I very comfortable taking on new challenges. And in fact, I made it a vow to myself quite a few years ago, about 15 years ago, to have an adventure every day, to do something out of my comfort zone so that I continue to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Oh, wow, I love that. How do you set that up? Is that something you do like the day before? You're like, all right, I'm doing this tomorrow, or like what's kind of the genesis of that? That's interesting.
Well, it's basically I'm sitting there making a choice between choice A and B. A is a safe status quo, know which way to go route, and B, like, well, I don't know about that. I don't know what the outcome might be. I might get lost. I will very frequently turn off the GPS on my computer, on my car, or my phone, and just try to wayfind,
Oh, wow.
just to challenge myself and see what happens. And sometimes I make it. Sometimes I get hopelessly lost and have to turn it on again. But it's a way of just challenging myself. And I'll just use that as an example. So instead of having everything figured out, I try to challenge myself to, for example, go up and talk to complete strangers. And they're like, who is this crazy woman talking to me? Why is she striking up a conversation with me? So I try to have these adventures because you never know where you're going to end up.
Do you find that, when, and especially maybe if you talk with, or, especially younger entrepreneurs, early in the game trying to build businesses, do you find that's maybe I guess a big, I guess you call it maybe a strength of those that end up being successful, is that they're willing to take that uncomfortable risk, what seems like risk, I guess, but very uncomfortable with doing the thing that's not popular, I guess is the way to put it.
Well, I can speak as an entrepreneur myself. I After a decade at Forrester, I decided to leave, and it was because I kinda ran out of things to do there. Great company, really fostered so much learning and growth in myself, but after I published my first book, I needed to do something different. So I left without a job, without really a clear idea what I was going to do, and I set up a company and then discovered that it took off very quickly, got some new partners to come in, and I did this at the ripe old age of 42.
Mm,
So I think what happens, and I do encourage young people early on, is to take risks. Why not risk
yeah,
everything? If you have student loans, find ways to be able to cover that or delay them. But take as many risks as you can early so that you know what it's like to eat ramen noodles. You know what it's like to have to just bridge things and make things work. And it will give you the confidence that you can set off on something and know that no matter whether it works or it doesn't work, you're going to be okay.
mm,
And that's what I did when I started launching my entrepreneurial career, is that I didn't know what was gonna happen.
yeah,
I could be a flaming failure, but I gave myself a year. I had a year of cushion, doing which I could spend about 6 months exploring, seeing if it would could there's a
yeah.
possibility of it working, and if it didn't, I would give myself 3 to 6 months to look for another job.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So and I figured I'd be okay no matter what happened.
Yeah, I like that thought, and that's kind of, I had Mike Lewis on that wrote When to Jump, and I kind of like that thought of having this plan. Don't just quit and be like, maybe I'll do something tomorrow. But I like that you had a plan. All right, I'm gonna give it a year. After 6 months, so and so, I'll do this. Did you know what type of business you wanted to start? Did you at least have that idea mapped out, or
Yeah, I in my crazy mind, I decided to go back and be an analyst because I enjoyed it.
no?
And so but I was gonna do it a very different way. So, all the other analyst firms are these big, large, multi-million, billion-dollar companies, and there was just me and maybe a few other partners. So, our ability to follow the same business model was not going to work, so we're going to do a completely different business model. We'd write the same quality type of reports, but we would give it away for free
Mm,
and then make it back with consulting that would be very specific to a type of consulting that we could replicate very quickly.
mm.
So it was a completely disruptive business model, and we did great. And 7 years later, I sold the company,
Wow.
so it had an exit. So it's one of those things, and it was because we built a brand around the company. And people otherwise, as a professional services firm, what are you buying? It's just acqui-hires and talent hires.
Mm,
But we actually had a brand that somebody valued,
mm.
so that was what was acquired.
Do you remember your first client you got in?
I sure do. Yes. I had a whole list of people who I thought I could call and get as clients, and none of them panned out. And I got 3 clients that, came out of the blue, heard that I was setting up shop and said, "We want to engage you." So, within the first month of me setting up shop and putting my name out there as somebody you could hire, I had 3 clients.
Mm,
So and they would sign year-long retainers, and, that got me through the first year and allowed me to recruit a bunch of other people, set up an office, set up a company, and, off to the races after that.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, the reason I asked that, because a lot of folks don't think about networking and the importance of kind of just building out a group of individuals, whether it's close connections or people and you might not always talk to them, but at least you never know when you might utilize that network, and vice versa. Were they folks from a network you grew, or just kind of random? I-
No, I mean, I've been very deliberate about growing an audience.
Yeah.
And again, I covered social media at the rise of social media, so I had the advantage of a lot of people following me early on. So I have like close to 300,000 people following me on LinkedIn.
Mm,
A very robust
yeah.
mailing list. It's not huge. It's about 10,000 people or so, but it's a very, very loyal list. And so it's not about quantity, it's the quality of the relationships. And so it's amazing to me where somebody will reach out to me and say, I've been following you for decades and I love what you write, but I finally have a reason to call you.
Mm.
Can you come in and help us with this particular problem?
Yeah.
And that's the vast majority of my engagements. Instead of me reaching out to people, it's inbound. And so when I started Altimeter Group, that was our entire model, was to use content to attract people. So 100% of our work was inbound. None of it was outbound.
Wow.
And so all we had to do at that point was to scope. And basically our content had sold ourselves. People would call and say, have you been sitting on my shoulder? Have you been in my boardroom? How do you know we have this problem? And when you have 100,000 people reading your reports, you only need a small number of them to convert. And the ones we wanted to convert were the ones that we knew we could solve their problems really, really well.
Mm. Yeah, I
So
love
that's
that.
how we built the business.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think that's why like putting yourself out there, writing on it, sharing your thoughts and insights. And it's not only like you're sharing great thoughts, it's that people see who you are. Because most like, especially when you're a young firm, they're buying you as much as they're buying the product or service that you have. So I think that's really important. I want to go back because you mentioned, we were talking about some advice about like the early founder, and you're kind of talking kind of folks that, go take that risk early on. What about someone that, I'm 41. What about someone that's late 30s, in their 40s? Maybe they have a mortgage, they have kids, and they're like, I don't know if I can leave this job. Is there a different advice you'd give them, or would it be the same?
It is, I will tell you, the hardest decision I had to make was to leave. It was by far the hardest one because it was a place, it was my intellectual home. I had so many good friends. I loved the work. It was so hard to decide to leave. And it was only when I had tried every possible route to stay that I realized I had to leave. I couldn't stay anymore. And so it was a question then of what to do. But the hardest decision is to leave, especially a place that is okay. It works, pays the bills. And especially if you have young kids, you have a mortgage, you have aging parents. I mean, you're in that sandwich generation, really, really hard. Again, this is why I think knowing what your capacity for risk is, if you have the ability to have Cobra for insurance, for example, do you have enough to live on for a short period of time while you explore this, or can you do it concurrently? But again, I go back to the difference between anxiety and excitement is confidence. And so you have to do what you can do to build up enough confidence to make sure you're not going to be anxious about this. And I was married for many, many years to a serial entrepreneur. So I could see these like up and downs of that roller coaster of anxiety
Mm.
versus excitement. And the thing that kept him going, kept me going through this was, again, having confidence that no matter what happened, you're going to be okay. Not necessarily they're gonna be successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. And just because you're not successful out of the gate doesn't mean you can't continue to meander down that path and be successful, right? I mean, if you don't start out like that, doesn't mean,
We know that prior success does not portend future success. So, and if nothing else, you will learn so much. So I do think it's important for any leader, but especially for entrepreneurs, to have a very, very healthy relationship with failure. So, how do you feel when something doesn't go right? Do you feel shame? Do you feel like personally that you have done something wrong? Versus, can you separate the effort that you put in, that you know you did the best that you could possibly do? And how could you ask yourself to do any better than your best? And so, feel really good about that and feel really good that you put your best effort forward because that's all anybody could ever ask.
Right.
And then the shame has to be looking at, okay, how do we make the decisions with the information we had at the time? How do we make better decisions next time? And so I look at this entrepreneurial risk filled journey as quite the adventure that I'm going to learn and grow from.
Mm.
And yeah, it's not always going to be fun and pleasant. In fact, it's pretty miserable and messy the vast majority of the time. But again, I would not trade it for anything. I'm back being a solo entrepreneur, and it's absolutely wonderful. I just absolutely adore it and love it.
Mm. What do you do? Like you talk about the failure and you almost have to kind of keep it close by and have this relationship, as you say. I like that. Do you sit and think about, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly, about, okay, what did I do well here? What didn't I do well? Like, do you do that assessment? And if you do, like, how do you break that down? That might be helpful for others.
Yeah, I'm not as consistent as I'd like to be, but the usual habit is I begin at the beginning of the day with, this is what my accomplishment, this is what I wanna do. I follow the Mark Twain thing. What frog will you eat first? It's
Yeah.
like if you eat a frog,
Yeah.
everything first thing in the morning, everything else is easy. So what's the frog I have to eat today? And I make sure I do that. And then at the end of the day, I assess what got in the way. Did I accomplish that? Did I accomplish the things, major things I wanted to do? And it's not about crossing off everything on my list, but what are the most important things I have to get done to feel like it was a success? And at the end of the week and at the end of the month and each quarter. So those are the kind of assessments when you go back and like, did I set good expectations and goals for myself? And did I accomplish them? So that kind of reflection
Mm.
can create a tremendous amount of wisdom about what's really going on in your life.
Yeah. And when it's done over a period of time, it's amazing. I mean, I've seen this in my own life. Like, it's amazing how you look back, you're like, oh crap, because I've been having it so focused, now I know where like, you're not just meandering down a road helplessly. Like, you actually have some plan of action. It might not go to your point, it might not go as you want, but you actually have something that you can rely on, of like, okay, this is a good tool and a metric to use, at least to help me in the next phase. You know?
Yeah. I do a lot of work with organizations on transformation and having a plan over the next 18 months of where you want to be 18 months from now. And then every quarter where you want to accomplish. And at the end of each quarter, adjusting the plan. And
Mhm.
so that's the key career advice I give to people. Where do you see yourself 18 months from now? And then break it down by quarter to say, how would you know that you're making progress towards that goal? And so I continuously plan 18 months. And this is the best advice I got from Harvard Business School about how to plan my career. So, one piece of advice that was so important, that we need to spend as much time managing our career because it's the most important asset you will ever manage.
Yeah.
And we spend more time managing our Spotify playlists than we do our careers.
Yeah.
So, spending a little bit of time thinking strategically about this asset, your career, is probably the best thing you could do for your career.
So if you're saying 18 months is where most people should be looking out and having, is it a goal there? Is it like, I want to be here? What is that? Give me, go a little deeper. What does that 18 months look like?
I for myself, I have mapped out, like, this is what I want my life to look like. This is the type of work I want to be doing. This is where I want to be. I know I want to be on a couple of boards, public boards in 18 months. So what are the things I need to do now to get that in
Okay.
place? Right? Because that is a long term. You just don't turn around and just get on a board. There was a whole process, the connections and the networking you have to do, and then the interviews and et cetera, et cetera. So that is a process. So if I want to be on boards in 18 months, then I need to figure out now what are the steps I have to take and have a time schedule for that.
Mm. Well, it's the same. You talk with a lot of people like, yeah, I haven't got that promotion. And then it's like, well, what have you done to earn that promotion? Have you done anything? Have you been leading? Or you've just been waiting? And I think that's a good point, I guess, to be able to have that out. Do you break that down into specific goals? We talk about, okay, how do you get really hyper focused on a goal? So if it's like, let's use that, I want to get a promotion to the next level, whatever, director level next in 18 months. How do you break that down? How do you encourage people to do that?
Oh, you go and talk to other people who have done that promotion path and ask them what were the paths and stepping stones that you have to hit. You go and talk to your managers and say, what would it take for me to get to there? I really want to have this promotion. I think I'm qualified to do it. I'm not there yet today. What are the skills I need to have? What is the training, the experience? What do I have to demonstrate in a tangible way to earn my way into that position? So again, as a leader and a manager myself, for somebody to come to me and say, I would like to be in this position. And they said, I don't know what timeline it is. I have some humility around this. And I really would love your support and guidance on how to do this. Love that. I love that ambition.
Mm.
And so it's a very different thing that exists. I'm pretty hot. I'm pretty good. I think I'm going to get a promotion in 6 months. So tell me what I need to do. It's a very different type of attitude and approach.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the reality is you get promoted by helping the organization achieve its goals, helping the leaders who are around you succeed also as well. So figure out the top three goals of all the people in the chain of command. Understand what's most important to them and help them succeed. Because you may have a goal that's very important to you, but if it's not important to them, it won't matter.
Yeah.
So understand, in context, what is it that's most important to everybody?
Yeah, and I mean, I think what you're saying in summary really is like be proactive. Like you can't just sit back on your heels and just be like, all right, I mean, maybe I'll get a promotion, maybe not. Like go do some work. Figure out what the goals are, talk to your directors. It may not happen, but at least be proactive in that approach
Mhm.
versus just
Right. And the 2 things will happen. Either they're like, "Oh, yeah, I wanna be supportive of this," or like, I don't know." I mean, they'll kinda backwalk things, and that'll give you a lot of feedback too as well, that this may not be the path for you, and that if you want a promotion, this may not be the place to do it for whatever reason it may be. And then you have to exercise the most powerful power that you have, which is the power of 2 feet to walk out the door
Hmm.
and look for another position.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah.
Mhm.
But if you don't, if it, that's the thing. If it's not the, I mean, it's the same with like a relationship or anything else. If it's not the right fit, we have to have that moment where like, I see where this is going. The writing's on the wall. Am I willing to make what seems like a tough decision now, but it's going to make me the happiest I've ever been in a year down the road, going somewhere else or doing my own thing, whatever it ends up being, doesn't matter. And I think that's where a lot of folks get stuck. They're just kind of what I've found, at least, I bet you've experienced is like they'd rather be semi happy versus that one sliver of uncertainty and doubt that happens when you have to take a risk.
And I'm not gonna be the person to judge whether that's the right decision for them or not. There may be so many different life circumstances
Of
or
course.
past experiences that keep you from making that jump. So, totally wanna respect the fact that you may not want to jump. It's not the right time, it's not the right fit. But I hear from so many people, it's like, "I have so many ideas, they keep getting shot down. Nobody seems to appreciate me and respect me. What can I do to get them to respect me?" And I'm like, "Do you feel like you've done everything?" "Yes, I've done everything." And they go, "Why are you there still?"
Yeah.
I mean, your energy, your passion for what you think needs to happen would be potentially appreciated someplace else. At least interview. At least look. Don't resign right away. Go and take a look. Have you even looked? Have you even done informational interviews to see what's on the other side?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I insisted with my colleagues was that if they had worked with me for a while, I encouraged them to go and look, to scratch that itch, to see what else is out there. And I go, "You've been here for 2 years. What else are you thinking of doing?" And I'm like, I'm being very sincere. I want you to be successful. And if we at Altimeter can help you be successful, great. But if there's another opportunity, then I will help you look for that. And I ask in return that you help me find your replacement. And the loyalty you get from people when you're absolutely supportive of their long-term value that they create is just paid back in droves.
Yeah. Wow, I love it. Well, it's funny. I love what you just said there because I literally, I said, if I ever have like a company where I have employees, and I don't know if I ever want to do that, I like the solopreneurship route, but like exactly what you just said is like I said, I always wanted to be. We're like, hey, listen, go interview if you want. If you're not happy, let's talk about it. If there's not a fit here for you. So I love that position because I think that's how every company should be.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not going to be. One,
No, yeah, I mean, I had a saying that we'll talk about your last day and your first day of work, meaning we understand you're not gonna work here forever.
yeah,
And we have this tacit understanding that we know you're going to leave, but we're not gonna talk about it or acknowledge it.
yeah,
And so people slink behind your back. I mean, that's not to go do interviews, that's not being in integrity. So I'd rather much appreciate if somebody would tell me, like, "I'm thinking I need to move on." I'm like, "Great, fantastic. Let's help you figure that out. I'll pull out my entire Rolodex for you,
mhm,
and then we'll figure out how to make a really good, smooth transition." That's so much better than somebody giving you 2 weeks notice.
yeah.
And yet we have this false sense of congeniality that we have to preserve rather than this truthfulness that can actually come out in a deeper relationship that could be actually formed.
Well, one other point just to make, because I had a friend years ago, and I still I give this advice to other people now. He's like, Brian, you can always decline an offer. Go interview. You can always decline an offer because at the first line, I've been laid off before. A company will cut you. Why not go figure out what you're worth and interview and just see what's out there for you if you're open to it. So I think that's everyone should be doing that if they feel that they're not in a worthy position or somebody that's being respected.
You should always know your value.
Yeah.
You should always know what your value is and then be asking to be paid that, to be compensated fairly for that. And I find that especially if you've been in a position for a long time, it's hard to gauge what that value is. And so having the external information, the validation gives you, first of all, confidence to go negotiate, and then also potentially confidence to leave if you understand that your value is unique and could be seen from multiple perspectives as something that people really want to value.
Yeah. I want to take a slight right turn here because I don't want to fail to miss out on talking about AI. If we can go down that rabbit hole for a few minutes. So first and foremost, I'm just kind of curious, like when did you first discover AI, whatever form of AI you want to talk about, whether it's machine learning or something like that? Like when did you first discover it and it kind of got you excited?
It was, like, in the early teens, like 2010, 2011, 12, or something. I had a colleague, Susan Edlinger, who was really into big data. So early stages was analytics and then machine learning, and then, and I've been writing about artificial intelligence somewhat from a distance because 'cause I'm not a technologist. I couldn't play with the GPTs because I don't know how to use Python. So when ChatGPT came along, I'm like, "Finally, thank goodness, an interface that I can use
Yeah.
these tools with." And it was such a liberation to be able to access this incredibly powerful technology through a chat interface. So I started using it back when it came out in December of 2022 and started saying, okay, I'm going to pivot everything I do to that. I was working on a different book and said, okay, this is going to be completely transformational to the way that we can use these tools. So that's how I began getting into it, just playing with a lot. I learned how to code with it pretty quickly so I can use Python now to
Oh,
go do things.
nice.
So, and I still get completely lost in it. So I use GPT to get into it and then get me out of a complete and total mess. But I can write apps. I never thought I could do that.
Hmm.
It's been amazing.
What do you think? Because a lot of folks are very hesitant to use AI. Why is that the case? What's the hesitancy?
Yeah, again, we've been told it makes mistakes, you can't trust it, hallucinates. So people are like, well, if it's not going to be right all the time, it's not going to be, how do I know it's right or not? How can I trust it? So we have this sense of FOMO, fear of missing out, but we also have the sense of fogey, fear of getting in. And we're torn between these two. And so we're so early in this process. If you've been in the internet space, it's like before cascading style sheets came along, everything was being hand coded in HTML in the early web. It's we're so early. And so things are a mess. We don't know how things work. We're still building the tool sets. And we frankly don't know how to apply this messiness to a very ordered thing called a company or a business or an organization. And so organizations that have gone through some sort of digital transformation, who have an agile framework for work, their processes understand how to deal with messiness are the ones who are adopting generative AI faster than the others. Because it is something, again, it is not about the technology is actually pretty simple to use. The hard thing about this is that you have to transform people.
Hmm.
You have to transform the way they actually do work. And that is something that's very difficult to do at a personal level and also at an organizational level.
So how do you get so if a CEO comes in front of you now and they might be a large organization, like how do you convince them to start using AI?
I just worked with 50 CEOs and had 12 of them in a nice little workshop, and I built each of them a custom GPT, just using ChatGPT. Uploaded a couple of their publicly available articles, sat them down, and said, "This is how you construct a prompt. How to use context, roles, instructions, and output." And then said, "Go and put something into your custom GPT that you are actually working on right now." So one person said, "I've got this presentation need to make to this audience. Give me an outline." And he was amazed. It just spit it out for him. He goes, "That would have saved me so much time." Another person said, "Write me a blog post about my company, about this position." And I wrote it. And she goes, "That's amazing. That's exactly my voice." And then I said, "But I know you're also working on trying to be more empathetic in your communication. So let's tell it to go make this more empathetic, give some suggestions how to do that." Gave her some coaching, rewrote the thing, and emphasized this is what was different. And she goes, "That does not sound like me, but it's the way I should sound."
Hmm.
So just really showing them how to do the things they already need to do and want to do, and how to use it with ChatGPT or Claude or any of these tools in a way that helps them be better, faster, more efficient, and to use it as a sounding board not to get the perfect answer, but as a colleague, as a co pilot, as an adjunct to the way that they think and work. Because here's the thing, being a CEO, being a leader is one of the loneliest places you can be. There are very few people you can turn to for advice. So you have this thing here, you can tell it, this is the advice. I want you to be this really big specialist on whatever it is that you're working on. And it can be your thought partner, it can be a sounding board. It is incredibly valuable to leaders. So but the key thing I do is to train the top two levels of leadership on how to use these tools personally. Because if they understand what it is, very few of them are actually doing it. So they know it, not very many are doing it. If you don't do it, you can't lead.
Yeah.
You can't lead an organization through a transformation if you don't actually understand how it's going to transform people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like the two roads of either like I'm going to jump all in and learn this and really take a, hold of it, or I'd rather not know it. Like don't even tell me about it. Like I'd rather not even know about it. That's not
But
the best approach, right?
yeah, but I look at it this way. If you see the writing on the wall, it's like, I'm going to make sure we never have any laptops in the organization. Or even more recently, there's no way our organization could work remotely.
Right.
And then the pandemic hit, right? And I think people forget how resilient we are, how capable of change we are. And all you have to do is look back to the pandemic times. We as individuals and organizations are so much more capable of change than we give ourselves credit for. And if you see this as an external force, not as a negative disruption, because technology is always neutral, whether you see it as a disruption that's negative or you see that disruption that's an opportunity and an opportunity to do things in a different way, better and faster for your customers and better and faster than your competitors. And that will give you a competitive advantage and differentiation that others will have a harder time catching up to you on. So you can get productivity and efficiency in the beginning. You can also engage and enhance your relationships and experiences for your customers. And eventually you can take those baseline capabilities and skills and leverage them into new business models and revenue streams. And in many ways, go and enter into new markets that you never could have competed in because you have these new capabilities and skills. That is worth looking into,
Yeah.
I believe.
Absolutely. So let's put the tactical hat on for a minute. Well, so one, what are you encouraged? What tools? It ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude? You mentioned like what are some that you encourage people? Does it matter? I don't.
It doesn't matter. They're all good and bad for different reasons. So I just encourage you to use ChatGPT because it's pretty good at everything, but none of them will work well unless you give it very specific instructions. So some people call it prompt engineering. I think of it as prompt conversations.
Okay.
And so give it a very specific task, tell it to take on a particular role because it then becomes an expert in something. And at the end of your request, you can add this sentence. Before you start, please ask me any clarifying questions you may have. And you'd be amazed what it comes back with. Because you can't think of every single circumstance, but it will look at your request and like, I'd like to have more information on these 3 or 4 things. And it'll ask you those questions and it'll take you a little while to give it all the details. And it will give you a fantastic result if you do that. And you can continue to refine it. So I think it's so important to be able to think about this as a conversation rather than just a one-off request. So again, I think it's a key thing to think about. You have to learn how to use one tool. And once you use that one tool, I typically have ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and Perplexity all put up in tabs next to each other.
Oh wow.
And I'll take an initial prompt, write it into one, copy into the others, and see which one I get a better result in. Now with ChatGPT, they just announced ChatGPT Search GPT. So all bets are off again. It's like, okay, which one of these is good? Because Gemini incorporated it, Perplexity had search into it. It's completely different power. A new version of Sonnet just came out with Claude. So how is that going to work? Instead of trying to figure out which is the best one, so to speak, I just copy and paste. This is my method to the madness. I copy and paste, see which one gives me the best questions or results coming back, and I use that one.
Hmm.
I use that engine for that particular task.
And
So
what
for every
you mentioned Claude. I haven't used Claude much. What is Sonnet? You mentioned that word.
So Claude is Sonnet is just one of the models
Oh,
inside of Claude.
okay.
So they have Haiku, Opus, Sonnet. Sonnet is the most powerful one that they have. I do find it's much more lyrical in the way it writes, but I have a custom version on ChatGPT that has all of my writings, all of my content, all of my podcast transcripts, like everything is in there. And so it really understands my voice and my tone, and depending on whether I'm writing a speech or if I'm writing a blog post, it can understand what particular style to use for that particular type of content, for that artifact. And so having that customization allows it to write in the way that I want it to write in.
So your upload so as an example, so I have like, I don't know, like 500 blog articles I've wrote over the last handful of years. You're saying I should upload all of that, and I have like it's all in a big Google Doc. I should just upload that Google Doc, and then when I start prompting it to suggest certain things, now that it's gonna utilize that to really hone in on my voice.
Yeah. Yeah, the beauty is that you have it all in one giant doc,
Yeah.
which is great. Download a PDF of that. I have the same thing. All of my articles and emails are in one giant doc. It's getting a little unwieldy actually. So, it's just upload that. I have my latest book. I have chapters of my book in there. So, depending on what I'm doing, I'll have it look at different parts of my knowledge base. And it's just GPT. It's my GPT inside of ChatGPT. And again, it's the same tool that I use to customize it for these CEOs. And they had between 3 and 7 articles and pieces of information in there. It was not a lot. And because it was in there along with some very specific instructions about what the role of that was to be, an advisor, copywriter, all those kinds of things, some basic instructions on what to do and how to interact with that CEO. So it doesn't take a lot to customize and make these tools relevant to you, because instead of the entire world and being an expert on everything, it's going to be an expert on you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I mean, I agree. I've used it in a decent capacity, but like a lot to I think the example you use, but like being able to have an outline, being able to come up with maybe questions I wouldn't have considered, like that's been helpful a lot. Again, just doing things where I'm like, oh yeah, I never would have actually thought of this. As an example, since we're on the topic, it's like I just did this thing. I don't know. Do you know who Donald Miller is? He has this the book called like the Story Brand. It's a really good book about like just being able to build your brand and messaging, but like taking some of his thoughts there of like, okay, if I'm building like, okay, who's your villain with your brand and who's, these different things. And you can put them in chat GPT and then get an idea of asking you more questions or being able to clarify. It actually helped me like think through the brand even further than I probably would have ever come up with. So to your
Mhm.
point, it's kind of like just using it in a simple capacity like that could be really helpful to
It's
get it to the
amazing.
next level.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a book that I'm interested in and, take the concepts of that book or a strategist or, for example, I really love and admire the work from Roger Martin as a strategist. He was one of my early mentors. And so his work is permeated throughout so much of my writings and my thinking. And I'm like, okay, I have this concept. How can I apply his concept of a strategy cascade to this particular concept? And it just kind of gives me a bunch of ideas, and I can take that and then build on it in a conversation with that GPT. So it's incredibly powerful. And the speed at which I can iterate new ideas and inject new ones in, I cannot even begin to imagine how I would do my work today without these tools. In fact, sometimes I'm on a plane or something, I want to get something done, like, oh, shoot,
Yeah.
it's not fast enough, this connection to be able to do this kind of work, so I have to wait. But it's become very indispensable to me. And I also know that because all my content is in these LLMs, about 70% of the work that I did is no longer relevant. So because anybody can just go to the GPTs and just ask it to be me, and they'll get a pretty decent answer
Mm.
as me. So I have to stay on top of this, or else I will be disrupted out of my position. So I have to stay fresh on top of things, use these tools. I have built an AI avatar that I can use to go and create content for me. It's connected to my knowledge base. My hope is that I can send it off to give talks that I have written with tools
Mm.
in whatever language I want to. And it looks just like this,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Yeah, so it's pretty darn good. And then I also have an interactive version. It's not ready for prime time yet because the processing speeds are still quite low. But you'll be able to ask questions and it'll respond back to you with audio and video and full audio in whatever language you want with answers from my knowledge base in real time. Not quite ready for prime time. The AI avatar is great, and the reason I wanna use it is I wanna be able to create courses and speeches that are much more customized than what I can do as a person. I can customize it not only to a company's values and principles and their security protocols, for example, the training, but I can also customize it for the way that each person learns. Some people are visual learners, other people are auditory learners, some people are kinetic or experiential learners. So why do we have to put up with this idea that one course fits all and lower things to the lowest common denominator? In fact, I can go and optimize the courses that I create for each person using AI.
Are you building this yourself?
I'm building it, and the problem right now is there are no platforms that allow that type of customization. So I'm kind of talking to some of these providers to say, "Can you do this?" Or again, I'm going to probably have to do it on the back end with some Zapier or some other tools. But the idea is, again, this is my entrepreneurial crazy
I
stuff that
love it.
experiments and tries going out and doing things. So I love this idea that I can continue to experiment and push the edge. I have this avatar. Has me filmed from 3 different directions with 3 different outfits, so I can have a lot of variety in there. And it's good enough to do courses. It's good enough almost to do a keynote. Doesn't do humor very well yet. So it's not quite ready for a keynote speech, but it can do courses pretty darn well.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Well, I'm excited to hopefully you share that out soon. Or have you shared that out? Like, have you written on that at all, or put it?
Yeah, I have. I have it as I wrote an article on it, but the video is down, for various reasons, but I'm trying to find ways to get it back up again so you can all see it. But it's one of those things where I think it's again, I'll probably fix it, the link, and I just realized I have to fix it. But it's just a video, but it's 100% generated by AI, and I'm speaking 3 different languages as an example, and, fully expressing things that has a little bit of humor in it, and so it's pretty darn good,
Yeah.
and it's a little weird. It's pretty cool, and it's a little freaky.
Yeah.
And this is the uncanny valley that we're heading into. That the closer we become human, but it's not quite completely human, and it kind of gives us the heebie-jeebies, and so therefore we don't trust it. So I think the hardest thing right now is how do we bridge across the uncanny valley? We'll overlook the fact that yeah, it's not quite perfect, but darn, it's pretty darn good. What can we use this for?
Yeah.
How do we experiment with it to get even better? And this is the thing that I would say to people is like, yeah, you're going to build things, they're not going to completely work, but you'll learn so much more having built these things, having used these tools than where you were before. And that will make you a more informed buyer. It'll make you a more informed partner. You don't have to build everything yourself. But because I had built these avatars, when I went and talked to the vendor, I could ask for very specific things. I wanted to do this and not that. Can you make it do these things? Can you make it laugh? They go, we can't quite make it laugh yet, but we're getting
Yeah.
there. So
No.
these are the kinds of things by experimenting myself and pushing that edge allows me to continue to work with other partners to push their edges too.
No, I love that. Well, because I'm seeing that in the world today, like you have these kind of two paths of you can use AI to like, and we've all get the automated messages, and it's just like you could tell that's AI doing that. But then you could use it. So what you're talking about is you could use it to get really specific on the potential client you're working with, or whatever who it is, some customer you have, something you want to accomplish, and you can get really hyper specific, take a lot of the mundane tasks off your plate, but also be able to curtail to that client better. And that's a way I think it's more that human to human connection, I think deeper. Where right now it's hard to access some of that information from the internet. Let's have someone aggregate that for us, and now we can do some better research. That's where I hopefully see it going versus
Yeah,
the other route.
there are so many examples of companies and individuals who are using it to create value.
Yeah.
You don't have to look very far. I mean, there are ample examples. And so people ask me all the time, what's the ROI of AI? And I'm like, it's right there in front of you. But the bigger and better question to ask is, what are your biggest strategic goals and what are the gaps that are keeping you from achieving them? And how can AI help you plug those gaps? That turns it into a completely different conversation. It's about looking at generative AI as a transformational tool. So one insurance company was having a problem that they were letting all these calls go unanswered because they could tell from the telephone number that this is likely to be a very low producing call.
Mm.
So with limited capacity in their call centers, they just said these are not worth going after. So they go, why don't we put a voice AI on it? And then we'll answer these calls for these people instead of just letting it ring and no one answers. And we'll tell it it's an AI and we'd like to gather some information about you before connecting you with a human agent. And if it passed certain criteria, then they would connect you. And after the first month, they had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars just with that first experiment.
Mm.
So that is a great example. That's putting a little bit of investment against it to test it to see if it worked. And if it did, well, my goodness, look at all that money that's just lying there. And it increased the satisfaction of those customers who actually got a call, got insurance policies, increased the revenues without any additional manpower, and so it was a win-win across multiple dimensions. Those are right there for you to discover
Yeah.
inside each organization.
Mm. Well, that's good. Hopefully, that motivates someone to get out there and start using it today. Charlene, this was a lot of fun. Where do you spend time? You're at LinkedIn, obviously. It seems like where you're spending the most time. Anywhere else you'd encourage folks to reach out?
You can go to my website, charlenely.com. Everything's on there too as well. I publish all of my latest work and materials on LinkedIn. And you can also subscribe to get book updates and also my email newsletter from my website.
And I love the newsletter name, Big Gulp. I like that. I was assuming what that might be like the oh shit moment, but you got to do it. Is that the reason?
It is exactly
Okay.
it. I
Okay.
mean, the question becomes when you face that big gulp moment, will you be ready? How will you be ready? Because you never know when it's going to hit you.
Yeah.
So will you be ready? What do you have to do to prepare? Because at one time, at some point, it's gonna hit you. Like, okay, this is a big gulp moment. We got to take a deep breath, take that big gulp, and make a decision. Are we going to jump or not?
I love it. Charlene, this is a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on.
Again, thanks for having me.